And welcome back to our show. The Bronx Developmental Disabilities Council is an association of parents, advocates, consumers, and professionals concerned with the needs of people with developmental disabilities who reside right in the borough of the Bronx. Now, through their executive board and their standing committees, as well as special events, they provide a forum for the discussion of issues. They also provide information and support the families and advocate for social and economic issues that affect the quality of life of the people that they serve. They're connected about the quality of life to people with several developmental disabilities, as well as neurological impairments and learning disabilities. And through the pandemic, disabled individuals are suffering due to a lack of federal support and funding for services. And here to provide more information about this is the Bronx Developmental Disabilities Council's Vice President, Omayra Andino, and then also we've got the Family Vice President, Edie Weber, and good to have you both here with us on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Well, when we talk about, and we'll go right at it, developmental disabilities, we know New York State is suffering with a huge financial crisis, also New York City, but talk to us about what you're finding, particularly with the developmental disabilities community in regards to being able to provide services, particularly at a time like this.
So from the provider perspective, I'm also the CEO for IAHD, and we provide services to upwards of 750 people who have developmental disabilities. And we've really experienced the challenge of COVID similar to the rest of the population, but in a different way. We have people who live in residences, and we have people who attended our day programs. We had pre-COVID, we had upwards of 440 people who attended in-person day programming. We had March 18th marked the day where things just drastically changed. And from one day to the next, people had to be provided services at home in their residences that we support. And then we also had people in the community who did not live in any of our residences that needed to be provided with support. And that they faced a lot of challenges there as well, because when we tried to change over to virtual programming, we saw that there were a lot of inequities, a lot of families who were not able to access Wi-Fi and couldn't get services via the internet. And then we had to change things drastically in the residences and provide day programming services that we're equipped to do in the program in the residence now. So it's been a big challenge. We've had in our industry, people with developmental disabilities are 5 times more likely to contract COVID. And so that presented its own challenges because we're dealing with people who have a hard time in many instances, following those rules that we talk about, wearing a mask, social distancing, washing your hands, because they don't necessarily understand the impact of those things. So it's been a big challenge.
Yeah. Edie, can you give us a little bit about the Developmental Disabilities Council for people who may not be so familiar? Talk about the great work that you guys do.
So, I just want to touch on from the parent perspective before we get into the council itself. And, I have a 22-year-old son with autism that receives in-home services. He's also in a supported employment program. And I personally see my son regressing. The advances in behavior and his psychological well-being are being lost. Omayra touched on virtual programming. Virtual programming doesn't really work for everyone. Many people need assistance to participate in virtual programming. Their routines and their lives have drastically changed, as has for all of us. But I think that we need shorter, more targeted virtual sessions for these people. And, there's also additional costs for families. I mean, not everyone has access to technology. I mean, the digital divide is real. And I don't think many of us really understand that until we're faced with this type of situation. And not only does it impact just my son, it impacts everyone in the house. So when we talked about services, I mean, from March 13th, really until September, he was without services, and it totally disrupted his life. What we do, from the work on the Developmental Disabilities Council, it's really a lot of advocacy work. And we can't have our children lose the services that so many parents fought for. I mean, there was a time when there were no services and the only option available to families was to put their child in an institution. And we cannot go back to those days of Willowbrook. So the work that we do on the council with Omayra, the provider network, and more importantly, the families to speak up and advocate for our children are vital.
Yeah, Omayra, I want to go back and stay on topic for a minute and talk about this because, Edie brings up and raises a very valid point. Since March, she's had to really deal with this transition. Automatically, somebody will say, listen, this is normally something that affects the child, but she creates a great point. It's not just child, it's family. So families are actually being impacted by this when a child does not get the necessary services. Let me talk to you from a couple of perspectives. Number one, on that virtual perspective, which she talked about. Everybody does not do well virtually. And number two, what could we be doing to kind of assist in a time like this, given the fact that we're in this second surge and it doesn't look like for the foreseeable future that things are going to be shifting?
So one of the things that we did at IAHD in March, when we realized that a lot of families would be disenfranchised, basically, is we developed a team that had to call the families every single week. All of the families, we had 125 families that could not access services anymore in person. So we had to pull resources to call those families. We did a survey to find out how many of them needed support, with technology. Some of them just needed us to bring them a laptop or a device where they could have virtual services. But then there was the learning curve. To your point, Daren, not everyone, we take it for granted sometimes because we have it so readily at our fingertips. But many families, not only do they not have access to it, but when they do, then they have to learn how to use it. And that's not so simple. Then they're also dealing with individuals who lived at home with their families that were so used to going to a day program that now when they're home all of the time, it creates mental health issues and behavioral issues that the families have to deal with. So there are just layers and layers of issues that are compounded by COVID.
Yeah. So I know that you guys are really outspoken as we talk about the advocacy work that goes on, raising your voice in support and against these cuts. And of course, New York City, New York State facing huge cuts, particularly due to the COVID-19 crisis. We already had some challenges already. COVID-19 really magnifying that to a higher degree. But I know that you also have a rally that's coming up. Talk about Save Our Services. So talk to us about the Save Our Services rally and how the public can actually become more aware of what you guys are facing and contending with.
So the rally is, again, it's the advocacy work of not only the Bronx Developmental Disabilities Council, but it's really a statewide initiative, and it's a parents group that got together. And we also had a mobile car rally in September to talk about Save Our Services and how the cuts are impacting services to families. And I think that, while the state's not responsible for the pandemic, but we're all responsible to confront the challenges that we're faced with the moment and to continue to support the most vulnerable of our population. And this will require more funding, not less funding. And right now, prior to the pandemic, there were cuts faced by service providers, and Omayra could touch more on that. And you talk about with the cuts, how it impacts staff retention. Again, my son receives in-home services. So he's gone for months without services because there was no staff to provide the service. And it's not, it's not that easy, right? You have to find a match. This person is coming into your home. And again, it impacts the entire family, not just my son. So when you have a revolving door of staff coming in and out because, they have to have 2 and 3 jobs just to help support their own families. What does it do to the person who's receiving the services? I often hear my son say, how come my friend's not coming to see me anymore? Trying to explain why, my son's no longer having his friend come over and provide those supports is a difficult conversation that I continue to have.
Yeah. And it
So for
seems to
you,
be getting worse rather than better. Omayra, you jump in.
so, we haven't had an increase, or, a basic cost of living increase in our industry for more than a decade. And so
Mm,
that was already, we were already facing challenges with funding. And when the pandemic hit, one of the things that happened is they allowed us to continue to receive our revenue and bill for those people who were not attending programs. So they allowed us to bill and be made whole. At a certain point, they said, okay, once people can return to program, you will not continue to get that retainer day. When people now are in so for instance, we had people who attended day program, and if someone tested positive and they all had to remain home, we couldn't continue to bill for those people who had to stay home. And that led us to now have to furlough people because we didn't have the funding to be able to pay those staff who were going to be, still in the program. So there are, the effects are cumulative, and they don't it's like I'm trying to figure out the best way to put it. They don't understand sometimes that it's not just there's these 20% withhold that we had. It's not just that, it's the cuts that have been happening over time and the lack of funding over time that now is really compounded by COVID.
right. It's a domino effect, which that's the saying. It takes, what's happening right now is the byproduct of a long time of a series of cuts, and that's impacted you to the place where there's domino effect. So we always uplift what the challenges are, but share with me a little bit about what kind of response are you getting when you talk to electeds, when you talk to others out there in the community? Because while I'm familiar with some of this, a lot of things that you're saying now, fresh revelation. And I'm sure for a lot of people, there's also that same thing where it's fresh revelation to them.
Yeah, we do have good support from some of our legislators who have been there on the front lines fighting for us and fighting with us, and who will be at the rally as well. The rally is to bring awareness to those people in the community that may not really understand, first of all, who our community is, who are the people that we support, and also the impact that this has had on a very vulnerable population. You hear a lot about the nursing homes and our seniors, which is very valid. But I think sometimes they have forgotten that people with disabilities and with developmental disabilities are a very significant group in the community that's vulnerable. So our legislators, what we're asking for them is to be our advocates. We're asking our governor, be our advocate and fight for that funding so that we can continue to provide those services for people who are some of our most vulnerable in our community.
Yeah. Edie, for you, what's been the biggest challenge since March? I mean, we highlight March 18th to be that day when, for a lot of people, the world literally changed. Their world literally changed. Talk to us about what's been the biggest challenge for you since this all is taking place.
For me, I guess the biggest challenge was really trying to explain to my son why he couldn't go to camp. And camp, he's been going to camp for the past 10 years, loves camp, made friends, has the same staff that he sees every summer. And for him, he had the opportunity to actually work at camp in the past 2 years. So not only did he go to a place that he loved and made that connection, he was also able to work and earn a paycheck, which was so inspiring for him. He was so happy to have the opportunity. He worked in the kitchen. He helped serve meals. The second year that he worked there, he was helping with food prep, and he was gaining these skills to help him obtain a job, a full-time regular job. So for him and for us in the house, seeing him again, his behaviors starting to act up again, and not doing something that he loves has really been heartbreaking for me. Just having him in his room and really isolated in those four walls, again, as a parent is heartbreaking.
Yeah. We pray that things get better really soon and quickly. Omayra, how can people support the great work that you guys are doing, and how can we lend a helping hand?
Well, I think for one, people should try to educate themselves about what it is, the work that we do. I think if people are, care about the most vulnerable in our community, then they will also advocate to their legislators and say, please support people with developmental disabilities, support the organizations that provide the services to them. Their voice is important. The families' voices are important. Families who are receiving services and who are in the community and don't have a residence that's operated, let's say, by an IAHD or a sister organization, they also have to advocate, because legislators listen to their constituents, and the families are their constituents. So we're asking for people to raise their voice, to say no more cuts, to ask for the support that we need to be able to continue to provide people with what they deserve.
We're coming up to the end of our segment. I'll just leave it to both of you. If there's anything that you want the public to know before we get out of here, please tell us.
I would say that the more support that we get with the rally, the information will be shared. We'll send that out, and just participate and speak up for our most vulnerable population.
So I would ask families to raise their voice. Ask for the services that you need. Don't sit back and wait for services to be handed to you, because they will not. You have to ask for what you need, and you have to advocate for your loved ones in order to get the services that your loved one deserves. And we're here
Edie,
to fight with you.
Yeah. Edie, Omayra, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with us. Best wishes. Enjoy this holiday season. I know it's a lot to navigate, but we'll check back with you and find out how things are going.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. We are taking a quick break. We want you to stay with us here on the Social Justice Forums. We've got another very special guest doing some nutritional work. Talk about that in a minute.